Teachers, what is the worst thing you've seen a parent do to their child that either made you want to or did make you call Child Protective Services? Story 1. About 5 years ago, in my 10th grade English class, one of the best students I've ever had the honor of teaching came to class horribly beaten up. He was over an hour early and just slowly walked to his seat and sat there quietly. I sat next to him, begging him to tell me what happened. He did, but I wish he hadn't. His dad found out that my student was gay and decided that no son of his would be or could be gay. So he decided to beat the gayness out of him. He beat him to a pulp, 2 black eyes, a broken nose, broken ribs, and numerous cuts and bruises. When he was done beating him, he ripped my student's clothes off and put a meat cleaver on the table and made him watch gay porn naked in order to make sure that he wouldn't get a hard-on. He told him if he got hard, he would chop it off. I didn't let him finish. I didn't want to know what else he had endured. I called the cops. An ambulance was sent for my student. They found the dad at work. He was an elementary school teacher, teaching his class like it was just another normal Monday. It took everything I had to keep from going there and running that mother fricker over with my car. Thankfully, his mom wasn't as controlled as I was. She tried ripping her husband's head off at the police station. It literally took 4 cops to get her off of him. She's about 5'2", 90 or 100 pounds. He's about 6'2", 250 pounds, and she messed him up. And after she walked out of the station, she went home and burned every single one of his things in the fireplace. Glad to say my student made a full recovery. He, along with his mom and siblings, spend all the holidays with us. Story 2. I don't know if this counts, but I called the CPS for my sisters and I. My sisters and I were regularly beaten for failing any tests. We were sitting at a desk, and when we didn't answer a question right, we were punched, hair pulled, face slammed into the desk, and pinched. Our parents beat us really often, and sometimes for no reason. Once I was sweeping when she told me to, and I was scared because she was going one by one to each of my sisters to beat them, and I heard the screaming get closer. I got frantic and stopped because the beating was inevitable. She just started kicking when she pushed me to the floor. The breaking point was when she tried to drown my sister in the bathtub. I told my counselor, who wrote down the report completely. I desperately asked to go into foster care. Months later, about 6 to 7 months, a woman came to talk to me. They told me to go to the front, and the receptionist whispered, "Your caseworker is in the room to the right." CPS interviewed me, and her face was in shock. She apologized for taking so long and said, "We go to those who can't speak for themselves first." Then she made one home visit. My sisters were too scared to say anything, and I told her, "Please don't give up. They're too scared to say anything because my parents are listening in the other room." She nodded and left. Again, months later, I came home from a friend's, and my mom said CPS gave her an entire copy of the report I gave to them. I've never seen her more angry. I thought she was bluffing and said, "No, I didn't." Then she said the date, time, and what I said in the report. I told my counselor, and she said, "Well, I called CPS, and they said they didn't do that." So, yeah, the abuse just went on. To this day, my stomach curdles at the thought of why and how CPS could do nothing. Just one home visit and gone. Story 3. I was teaching a winter vacation class for some of my elementary students. It's meant to be a more fun version of the class that also gives a little boost in knowledge. There's a voluntary class that the students sign up for. This time I happened to have a group of only low-level students. I was trying to be extra nice and encouraging to them during the week of classes so they could be more excited and feel good about themselves. There was one boy who was one of the lowest level students in his class and rarely was able to put his hand up and answer questions. On this day, he was actively participating a lot and was being very cheerful, so I felt very proud of him. At the end of the class, I went over to him to tell him what a good job he did that day and to pat him on the back, and as my hand got closer to him, he flinched and instinctively moved his arms to block his face. I was shocked, but he just laughed and casually said, I thought you were going to hit me." Of course, I told him that I wasn't going to, and that he did really well that day. Unfortunately, I don't really have the power to go deeper into what's caused him to be that way. I just try to be really nice to him when he's in my class, and help him out when he's struggling with the work, so he's not so far behind the other kids. Story 4. Substitute here. I had to call CPS when a middle schooler broke down when I told him I was sending him to the assistant principal's office for making inappropriate comments to classmates. He begged me not to because he couldn't get in trouble with my dad again. I asked why because my spidey senses went off, and he showed me the bruises and blood on his thighs and told me they went higher. In a case CPS was already involved in, I had an 8th grader with frequent pants wetting incidents, which is a massive red flag for abuse. I had a 7-year-old confess self-harm thoughts to me. I still think about him and hope he got help. He cried and thanked me when I told him I had feelings like that at his age too. I had a 5-year-old wrap me up in a bear hug and beg me to adopt him so he could have a mommy who loved him. He'd known me for 2 hours, and I'd told him I liked his drawing. Last week was my last week of teaching. I will miss the kids terribly, but not the mental burden of so many babies going through heck in a system that is set up to fail most of them from the start. Story 5. Not a teacher myself, but my mom is one. This isn't about a parent either, but I think it fits with the question, so screw it. They had this one autistic kid at their school, basically normal for specialized schools, but also too autistic to visit a regular school unattended, because the kid essentially couldn't judge dangerous situations, like playing around deep ponds or high edges. So the parents hired this specialist who would accompany the kid during school, looking out for it, etc. A few weeks ago, it was revealed that this pricey, highly trained specialist was absolutely terrible at his job, screamed at the kid for not listening to him, locked him out of the classrooms, leaving him alone for a prolonged period of time, all the things you shouldn't do to an autistic kid that you're hired to care for. So yeah, now they have this autistic kid that shouldn't be at a regular school in the middle of the school year when no other specialist is available, and the father who's threatening to sue them because they didn't notice anything till some students told them. Story 6. Not a teacher, but a nanny. I saw a situation when I nannied one summer. 9-year-old off at camp, 5 years old and 5 months old. Dad worked full-time and mom worked from home. 5 years old had severe middle child syndrome, but for good reason, as she only got attention when she screamed. I had to physically pick her up and put her in her room every tantrum. Mom's rules, not mine. And I was young then and didn't have the balls to stand up for the kid. The 5-month-old was starting to imitate the behavior too. Dad was never home, and Mom never left her office except to eat or get the baby to breastfeed, where she would take him back into the office with him. These kids weren't getting a supportive environment at home, but I loved them best I could. Not bad enough to call CPS, but I knew they were hurting. I could see exactly how these kids were going to be messed up in the future, couldn't do much about it. Story 7. Did my first CPS report on a student this year. She's a very emotional child, and I noticed something was up immediately when she started acting out in class. She opened up to me at recess one day, saying that her parents fight all the time. They scream and yell and hit each other, and it makes her sad. She said that one night, Dad was about to hit Mom, and she didn't want him to, so she got in the way to stop him, and he ended up hitting her in the mouth instead. What's crazy is that her stories were so similar to what I went through as a kid. My parents would always have these ugly fights, where they would scream and throw things at each other, and my mom would end up physically attacking my dad, among other things, like pull a knife out in front of us and threaten to hurt herself. It's crazy to look back and think that if I would have confided in my teacher or counselor about all of that, they would have reported my parents to CPS. I never thought that till my student confided in me about her own family issues. Story 8. I was the one who discovered the abuse. I had a student who was strangely very violent, irritable, and loud. He was very difficult, and the other students were afraid of him because he was a bully and would beat them up. One day I moved to take him to time out after an incident like this occurred again. It was a daily thing. Well, as soon as I stood up and started walking to him, suddenly he threw up his arms in that crossed position. If you've ever been hit as a kid, you know the pose. I was obviously confused and worried. I sat him down and asked him what he was talking about, and he was just bawling, screaming, "Mommy, don't hit me, please don't hurt me," over and over. I lifted up his sleeves, and there were bruises all over his arms. Technically, I'm still a student teacher only, so I wasn't allowed in the room during the investigation. I did hear from a colleague that he was in fact removed from the home, and the mother had been beating him. Story 9. Had one particular year where we had a bunch of students who had terrible home lives. Roaches coming out of book bags, dirty clothes, etc. One parent-teacher conference, the parent was clearly on pills and kept talking about what a terrible child she had. But the kid wasn't bad at all. They just had low grades because they missed so much school. That summer, their house burned down, and their brother was arrested for making CP. Another set of parents came in that year with a toddler wearing only a diaper, and they were all really dirty, like they hadn't bathed in a week. The child always looked clean at school, though, which made me think they cleaned up in the bathroom before school. Story 10. Not me, but my mom. This kid was acting up at school, mostly kindergarten stuff, and when his parents found out, they would lock him in a closet and literally slide trays of food under a slot in the door. It was like this kid was in prison. You might think, whoa, severe timeout, but this kid missed school for 3 days because he was in the closet. It gets worse. He told his teachers why he was gone, so they called DCFS to handle the situation. The parents find out and buy a tarantula. You know where this is going. They let the tarantula bite the kid and send him off to school with a big spider bite on his hand. I saw him a couple weeks later, and the nurse had wrapped it in gauze because of how bad it had gotten. Story 11. Had a friend in high school whose mom refused to buy her toiletries, clothes, and food. She had to work and pay for it all herself, and also wouldn't pay for her school lunches. The friend had 2 little brothers who were spoiled heavily, and the mom wore 2 giant buttons of the boys on her clothes everywhere, but treated the friend like the plague. I visited her house once, which was fairly new, and the counters were covered in old dishes, and there was pet feces everywhere. They had 3 large dogs and multiple cats, all indoor pets. Thankfully, our school got involved, and she got emancipated from them at 17. She kept in contact with her dad, who was mostly under the mom's thumb, but never did anything bad toward her. Story 12. Not a teacher. Father is, though. A teacher in the school had 2 boys, both in high school. She had some mental issues and had to take a few weeks off. The older child came in smelling horrible a few days in a row, and the teacher pulled him aside and asked if everything was all right. He said, and I kid you not, Mom hasn't been around to give me a bath. Like it wasn't a big deal at all. Kid is 16 and his mother gives him a bath like you would a 3-year-old. When they brought his brother, 15, in to talk to him about his home life, he confirmed this. Not 4 hours later, CPS entered the home and removed them. Teacher is still employed. Story 13. I had the hospital call CPS on me and my ex-wife because we took our infant to the ER because his eyes were bloodshot and his tears looked like blood. They thought we shook him. Turns out he had just started solid foods and he had to take a massive dump and was straining so hard he popped blood vessels in his eyes. At one point, the doctors had him in his diaper on the examination table, checking for signs of abuse, while my son was screaming. They ask if he's like this all the time, and we say, no, he's usually not laying on a cold table in his diaper. Story 14. A couple years back, I was running a preschool classroom in a low-income area, had a kid who would constantly come in visibly dirty. Usually always had a dirty diaper, was almost 5, so we had a theory that she never really got a bath or changed or anything. Changed her up before sending her home one day, and I had my assistant draw a star on her diaper. Sure enough, go to change her when she arrives the next morning, and there's the star on her diaper. She had been in the same soaked diaper for nearly 18 hours. It was smart to mark the diaper. Story 15. Now, I'm not a teacher, but a parent. While I was waiting for my turn to talk to the teacher during the parent-teacher conference, this mother came out yelling at her kid. You should have practiced on your spelling. You'll never be as successful as I am. You'll never accomplish anything in your life. When we get home, you will practice your spell and maths until you get the best grades in the class. I will not accept you being a waste of my time and money. Not really threatening, but more scary and verbally abusive. Still made me a bit mad to see. Story 16. Had a student beaten so badly, he couldn't sit in his chair. Entire back was covered in lashes. Admin gets the mom to come to the school, and the cops are there waiting for her. They arrest her on the spot, while taking another child, an infant, out of her arms to do so. When they asked her why she did it, her response was, because he needed it. She was so warped she couldn't even come up with an excuse. So sad. You won't be needing this one anymore either. Story 17. Not a teacher, but I work in student support in a high school. We frequently put in child protection reports. The worst one was a 14-year-old girl living with her baby sister, mentally ill mom, and violent dad. Dad and mom got high on meth. Dad beats mom. Dad assaults the girl. Dad gets the girl pregnant and punches her in the stomach until the baby passes away. Girl denies anything is happening at home because she thinks if she's removed, she can't protect her baby sister anymore. Dad ended up in jail. Story 18. I'm friends with some teachers. One family literally lived in a cave. They did periodic welfare checks, but the kids were fed, cleaned, and clothed well enough, and they were sheltered, so that was that, as I understand. The parents have never been found to be on drugs or anything. They were just so poor that they lived in a freaking cave. This is in rural Appalachia in the U.S. Even my husband, who does home health, always has at least one patient with dirt floors and half-caved-in roofs. Story 19. In my town, there was an elementary school teacher who saw two kids coming to school with bruises on their faces and hands. She called the police, who arrived and took the kids home to their mother. She immediately thought they had done something wrong when they arrived with the police and found a stick behind the door and started beating the kids with it right in front of the officers. Immediate arrest and sent home within a week. Immigrant family. The children were put into foster homes. Story 20. My friend is a special ed teacher for the really bad cases. She's trying to get out of it because it's basically killing her. A lot of the kids that are in her classes are there because of the horrible things that have been done to them. One pair of sisters, maybe 6 and 8, came from an Eastern European orphanage where they were molested. Luckily, they got adopted by an American couple, so they got to start a new life together. Then their dad started molesting them. She calls CPS a lot. Story 21. Not a teacher, but I was playing with some kids one time, and one of them fell down because of the roots around this giant tree. She started crying immediately, but not because of the injury, but because her white shoes got scuffed. Her little brother hugged her really tight and kept saying he'd try to find a way to hide them when they got home so that mom didn't see them. The girl said she was going to get beaten up again. Told my mom called the police, never saw the kids again. Story 22. One of my first years lived with her adult sister and that sister's boyfriend. The mom was in jail, no father around. This girl came into school with a black eye, other bruising all over her face, bruised ribs, and who knows what else, because the boyfriend beat her for not letting her use her cell phone, that she paid for with an after-school job. The sister apparently held her down so he could keep hitting her in the face until she told him the password for her phone. They got arrested after I called the child maltreatment hotline. Story 23. One of my preschooler's parents sent him in the same socks over and over, and he had so much earwax and hunk that it smelled. I told my boss and went out to buy him some socks. Since we were playing with water, I just acted like he accidentally got his socks wet and put another pair on him and sent them both home. You bet your bottom dollar he was wearing the same socks I just gave him the next day. Story 24. Outside of school, I once called 911 for an infant that was left in a hot car in the sun with all doors and windows closed and locked. You should have seen the cop yelling at the mother when she got back to her car. There was once an incident where the police smashed the window of a car to rescue what turned out to be a realistic infant doll. Story 25. Not me, but a close relative. The first grader came in completely exhausted. When asked why, he detailed how his mother had taken him to work the night before, in her car, and how he had to sit in the front while she worked. Story 26. Freshman came in smelling like cat urine, which is a sign of meth cooking, especially in a rural school district. I told the nurse and school principal pulled the student from class. Never saw her again. Story 27. Not a teacher, but I went to school with a kid who fell out of a tree, broke multiple bones. Father made him go right back to school after having bones set with no pain meds to teach him a lesson. Story 28. Special needs student had markings on both wrists. When placing his wrists together, it was obvious they were being tied together. It ended up that his daycare was tying them together each day. Story 29. A teacher said to me once that she would adopt me if I ever wanted to run away from home. I don't think she was kidding. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.